Hello, this is I think the last video in a little series of videos that I'm recording to support knitting this project and also this project. And I've been focusing on knitting the mittens, and in the last one I showed you how I start knitting the stitches that go around this part of your thumb here. And now I'm going to explain with a visual what you do when you have finished that and you've got the specified number of stitches. So just a quick recap, this is my stitch marker, this tells me the beginning and the end of my rounds, and this is my thumb gusset in here. The number of stitches that I would have in a real pattern would probably be, I think in this case it's 17, but in this one I've only got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 because we don't really need that many. So my patterns will then say you've increased, in this case by doing yarn forwards, but it doesn't really matter how you've increased, until you've got to the set number of stitches. And then you will work one more round so that you're not trying to pick up and save a yarn forward, for example, or a made stitch. So we'll have done a round where we have, for example, slip thumb marker 1, yarn forward, knit 15, yarn forward, slip thumb marker 2, and then the next round would be knit to thumb marker 1, knit 17, slip marker 2, knit to the end of the round. And so let's imagine that I've done all of that now, so I've got actual stitches here, and the pattern will say knit to the thumb marker, the first thumb marker, and remove it, and then I will ask you to put these stitches, it'll be whatever number it is, onto a yarn, a length of spare yarn, or a stitch holder. But stitch holders are really big usually, so I just use big safety pins, and I can easily get 19 stitches onto those. So I'm going to slip these. Note that I'm, as always, slipping the stitches purlwise because that gives me a neutral, untwisted stitch. So I'm going to slip all of those onto here, and they're now live but safe. Then remove the second thumb marker, and then my pattern will tell you to cast on a number of stitches onto the onto your needle. That's kind of to make up for these ones that we're losing here, and it will be 3 stitches. And what I do is I turn my work, and then I cast on however I can do it with whatever needles I've got available to me. I'll just cast on 3 stitches here. So that's 1, 2, 3. And then I'll turn my work back again. So I've got the right side facing, as you almost always do with mittens. And then my patterns will say, reach across this gap. It's a big gap here. I've only got 9 stitches in it, but in your real mitten, you're going to have maybe 17. So it is quite a big gap. So what you need to do is kind of snuggle it up. Your working yarn's back in position, and you're just going to knit on. So you're just reaching across that gap and closing it up as best you can. What is going to happen is the rest of the mitten carries on. You just ignore these stitches, they just hang around waiting for you. You'll carry on with the rest of the design until the top, and then my pattern will ask you to come back to those stitches and work them. And I'm just going to get round to the end of the round and then show you how that would work. It can look a little bit untidy, so you do need to be fairly firm with your tensioning at that point. And also, when you join in to actually finish the thumb later, leave fairly decent tails, because that will be something that you can then, with a bit of careful, clever sewing in of ends, you can tidy up any little gaps that might just appear there. So I've reached the end of that round. The next round will say knit X number of stitches, which will be to the point where you started your thumb in the first place. So in our pattern, our little pretend pattern here it was 7. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, and then these are the stitches that I cast on. You can see it looks a little bit baggy here, so I'm now going to just loosen those off a little bit so I can knit 2 together. Some patterns will say slip 1, knit 1, pass, slip stitch over. So I've knitted 2 together and then knit 1 and again knit 2 together. And then knit on to the end of the round. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to knit to the end of this needle and then we're just going to look at what we've got to deal with later. So as you can see now, I can carry on with the rest of the mitten, and then when I finished it and I've got to the top part, so I'm then here, but here I've still got these stitches on this stitch marker or safety pin. So then what's going to happen is you will take undo the pin, and with your double pointed needles you'll slip those stitches, which will be 17 stitches in this pattern, onto 2 of your double pointed needles, and then at this point here you turn this upside down, and along this base my patterns will ask you to pick up and knit 5 stitches. And this is the point at which you can do a little bit of clever picking up and knitting to make sure that you close any little gaps that you've got there. So I, for instance, would pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. And then those 17 plus those 5 are the number that you've got as you start your thumb, and then we'll get rid of 2 more in the next round, and then you will you'll have the number that you'll have to complete the thumb. So that is really all the technical elements of how to knit a mitten covered. And I think this part is probably the trickiest part of all, but much easier to see it than it is to actually read it written down.